hour of Up and At 'em, presented by Sandvold and Associates Financial Services Group.
We have lost hundreds and thousands of innocent people to gun violence. Tiny little children, babies, students, and teachers, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, daughters and sons, friends and neighbors. And what has this body done? Mr. Speaker, nothing. Not one thing. We have turned a deaf ears. We have turned deaf ears to the blood of the innocent and the concern of our nation. We are blind to a crisis. Mr. Speaker, where is the heart of this body? Where is our soul? Where is our moral leadership? Where is our courage? Now is the time for us to find a way to dramatize it, to make it real. We have to occupy the floor of the House until there's action.
Welcome back to Up and At 'em. I'm Jack Tomczak. That is Kurt Zellers and Pete Hexa filling in for Andrew Lee. And that is Lump, who's delivering our news bag, brought to us by Key Cadillac.
Yes, I am. And that was audio from John Lewis from, there's a sit-in spurs a late-night clash on the House floor.
Weird that he did it with a music bed underneath it.
I know.
Odd choice.
Yeah, right? I thought so, too.
I mean, good music, but odd.
Odd.
Yeah.
It's catchy.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of strange.
Thought it'd be more ominous, some sort of orchestra.
Yeah.
Yes. So House Republicans sought to end an extraordinary day of drama and a 16-hour sit-in by Democrats in the early hours of Thursday morning by adjourning for a recess that will last through July 5th. The move is an effort to shut down a protest that began Wednesday morning when Democrats took over the House floor and tried to force votes on gun control. Shortly after 6 a.m., about a dozen Democrats remained on the House floor, including House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. And the GOP bid to undermine the sit-in by swiftly closing the legislative session at 3:36 a.m., so they stuck around for a while.
A.M.?
Yes.
Wow.
At 3:36 a.m. It appeared to catch Democrats off guard that they ended in the middle of the night like that. The Democrats, however, have promised to continue without cameras, lights, or a legislative session. Nancy Pelosi said, just because they have left, it doesn't mean we have to take no as an answer.
Well, it kind of does since they adjourned. But I know there are literally...
See, Jack, that's why he's a TV and radio professional. Quick-witted.
Yeah. I mean, I was fixated on this last night, watching, of course, Fox wasn't covering it, but MSNBC was fawning over it as they
slobbering,
would.
maybe.
Of course. Yeah, slobbering is a very fair. There's still House Democrats on the floor right now, probably sleeping with the lights off, with the session over.
It just seems a little unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a filibuster. We're not talking about a filibuster here. We're talking about literally session adjourned, sit on the floor, and they were shouting down Speaker Ryan last night and chanting, "We shall overcome," and all of this. I mean, a lot of it, I think, is 60s throwback for these folks. They just want to...
That's what they do.
I think
It's
a little
what they
part
do.
of every protester is, man, it would have been great to be alive in the late 60s. Would have been
Dude.
John Lewis was.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, well, to be fair, John Lewis was a very courageous civil rights
Shut down
protester.
By the Occupy movement when he wanted to speak at one of their rallies. But yes, prior to that,
This
long,
is like
long
his
history.
jam.
This is his jam. He's like, I got this.
Well, and with all due respect to John Lewis, who, to your point, Pete, a true...
Civil rights leader,
advocate, leader.
Yeah, I'm a hero on that.
And this cheapens that. I mean, really. So you're going to sit on the House floor, and you know what? I'm calling B as an S that Nancy Pelosi was actually sitting on the floor. She maybe had a
video of that. Yeah.
She had a throne brought in, and maybe she sat in the throne on the floor, but she was not in a sleeping. Her and her Coleman sleeping bag on the floor. No,
Kurt, why would you think that just because he's now advocating against people's civil rights, that this tarnishes any of the advocating for civil rights he had done before?
See, that's why you are a radio professional. You were reading my thoughts. Nicely done.
Yeah.
Well, it's and they just sort of look at Republicans and say, you have no leg to stand on, except for that whole due process thing that we may take seriously in light of it's not a knee-jerk reaction. Obviously, the left has been making this argument for a long time. But just because a very unfortunate incident occurred, an attack, now we cave on a constitutional principle we've had for 240 years. There's some good legislation that almost passed the Senate that would have given deference to due process and maybe a waiting period. It didn't even pass in the Senate. Right. Now it's not going to pass in the House. It's a lot of this is for politics. Yeah, well, and they're already raising money off of this with fundraising emails.
John Lewis was essentially arguing, why aren't we taking advantage of this crisis better? Take away people's rights to own a gun. That's insane.
And the same group of folks, and this has been brought up many times, especially on Fox News, where were they in Chicago? Right. I think it was O'Reilly had the number of people over the weekend that were either shot and killed or shot and wounded, including a 3-year-old, I think.
Well, you zip it. We're pushing a narrative here.
No, you're right, but it's like in Orlando every month.
Yeah, in Chicago. And some of the strictest gun laws in the country in Chicago.
And Pete Hagstaff, to answer your question, we were talking on the way in this morning. There have been things kind of like this before. In 1995, House Democrats took to the floor to protest a recess at a rare Saturday session of the House. And Republicans...
How dare you recess?
In 2008, in response to the $4 a gallon on gas.
Well, they got a point there.
It's kind of happened before.
But they were usually like sort of staged faux sessions. Mm-hmm. This was like, we're going to sit down and yell at you. And Louis Gohmert came over, he's a congressman from Florida, and said, no, this is about radical Islam. Radical Islam is what killed these 49 Americans in Orlando, and there was a screaming match, and they had to be separated. I mean, this was not about deliberation or a deliberative body. This was basically an Occupy protest inside the House of Representatives.
What else have you got, Lump, on this topic?
Yeah, Republicans said earlier that they wouldn't give Democrats the gun control votes they wanted, and we have some audio from Speaker Paul Ryan.
This is nothing more than a publicity stunt. That's point number one. Point number two is this bill was already defeated in the United States Senate. Number three, we are not going to take away a citizen's due process rights. We're not going to take away a citizen's constitutional rights without due process. That was already defeated in the Senate, and this is not a way to try and bring up legislation. Now, let's focus on the issue at hand here, terrorism, and let's find out what we need to do to prevent future terrorist attacks. And if a person is on a terror watch list and they go try to buy a gun, we have procedures in place to deal with that. We want to make sure that those procedures are done correctly, and that's something we should be able to do in a calm and cool manner without these sort of dilatory publicity stunt tactics to try and bring a bill that already died over in the Senate to the House floor.
I agree with the Speaker. Let's take Steve real quick out of St. Paul. Morning, Steve.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. What do you folks think about perhaps profiling individuals who might be on this terror watch list to see if they may be active terrorists or, trying to find other people who are maybe in sleeper cells or that type of thing?
Thanks, Steve. If you're on the list, that's already happened.
At some level,
you're on the list for a reason.
But the debate is about whether or not where the burden of proof lies. Does it lie with the government or the individual?
Right.
And that's a very important distinction.
Right.
More audio. We can break whenever we want. Andrew won't be back till Monday. Nobody else who works is listening, so we're fine.
The tension exploded onto the floor just after 10 p.m. Eastern Time when Ryan gavelled the chamber into order to hold a procedural vote on an unrelated matter. A dramatic scene unfolded as throngs of Democrats, some holding signs with the names of victims of gun violence, remained in the House while chanting, "No bill, no break," and "Shame, shame, shame." They also sang the protest anthem, "We Shall Overcome," and I believe that was after things had adjourned.
Do we have the... That's enough. We shall overcome other people's constitutional right to due process before they're denied Second Amendment rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Okay.
And God bless the writers at wherever you're reading that from, but seriously, there was drama. There was an eruption. 99.8% of Americans could give two craps about what these guys did on the House floor, whether or not they sat or slept or fell over or drooled on the House floor. They're acting like petulant kids.
All right, we'll take
That's
a break.
exactly
We'll come
right.
back. One more piece of audio from notable Congressman, old white guy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure his name was neither.
I don't know who he is either. That's what he
Yeah.
looks like, so that's what we'll call
So
him.
stick around for old white guy.
Kurt Zellers, Pete Hag, Seth Lump, and myself, all that and more when we return.